I fully appreciate being autistic and enjoy many of my autistic traits. However, one of the tougher aspects of autism for me is the confusion that sets in when engaging with others. But what inspires me and Tiffany is that the future of work requires an understanding of psychology, human behavior, and this includes autism.
So true. Our hope here is to move towards that future by empowering you with ways you can better support your autistic colleagues.
Hi, I'm Nicole Seward.
And I'm Dr. Tiffany Jameson. Please join us as we'll cover how to respect your autistic colleagues in their daily work, including how to respect sensory differences, adapt to social needs, build psychological safety, and improve interview processes.
To elevate voices, we've also included conversations we've had with two autistic people. I'm excited to share all of the strategies that we know help so many people in our work. For me, this is about showing what a new definition of success in the workplace can look like.
I'm excited too. Let's do it. In the previous video, we talked about what this course is about, but we want to briefly touch on what this course is not, out of respect for members of the vast autistic community. After all, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person.
We know that stereotyping autistic people's unique interests and abilities has pushed many of us autistic people out of the workforce. So Tiffany and I have designed this course for neurotypical or non-autistic people to help them move away from dangerous stereotypes and gain real insights about autism.
I think it's also important to mention that we discuss ways to support autistic people who generally don't need a dedicated job coach. Though we recognize in some cases, an employee might need a job coach to do their best work.
So we don't intend to overlook that many autistic people have support needs and may require additional adjustments when assigned to certain job tasks. And we deeply understand that most, if not all, autistic people face barriers to entering the workplace.
Again, because of our deep love and respect for the autistic and neurodivergent community, we share this.
While there is more awareness of autism in the workforce today, many people still don't accurately understand what autism is. Researchers McMahon and team found that employers' self-perception of their knowledge of autism is much higher than their actual knowledge. So what is autism? Autism is a developmental disability that affects sensory processing, executive functioning, and communication in social interactions. It can include language impairment, repetitive behaviors, and characteristics that make socializing hard for some. We view it as a neurological difference or diversity of the brain and cognition that results in unique thoughts and behaviors.
So that's the definition, but why does a course like this matter so much? The Center for Disease Control, CDC, estimates that 1 in 44 individuals are autistic, and 3.7 million autistic people are estimated to be in the workforce right now or actively looking for employment.
And despite having earned a college degree, many are in jobs below their skill level because there aren't enough inclusive workplace environments that understand and accept autistic people. Estimates place the underemployment or unemployment rate around 85%.
All this data tells a story of how vulnerable it can feel for a colleague to disclose that they are autistic. Disclosing can be beneficial, but it can also leave the person feeling vulnerable to others' judgments, lack of understanding, and stigmas associated with autism. And because autistic traits can be relatively non-visible and easy to hide, this creates a problem with getting the help and accommodations the person may need to do their best work.
Another challenge to hiring initiatives is the heavy focus on technology-related occupations. This has created a stereotype that technology is the best fit for us. But like everyone, we have varying skills and interests outside of tech. Things are getting better though. Today, some companies intentionally hire autistic people. These efforts increase awareness of autism and the vast skill set autistic people bring to the workplace. It begins with gaining accurate knowledge about autism and a true view of the autistic community and all of the talent that is currently not recognized. And so we want to start this course with gratitude. Thank you for starting this course, for taking the first step in gaining more knowledge and awareness.
It's people like you who make our work possible. Stick with Nicole and I throughout all the videos in this course to reap the full benefits of how to support your colleagues at work. With his permission, I want to share my son's story. Jake was diagnosed as autistic when he was 2 years old. He was behind in language, but highly active, joyful, and loving. Everything we knew about autism, and it wasn't much, didn't match up with our son. But eventually he was diagnosed autistic, and we began supporting him the best we could with therapies, behavioral, speech, occupational, and special schools. Early support pays off. Jake currently lives an independent, full life, thanks to access to a diagnosis, the resources to get him the help he needs, and an early diagnosis, which research shows leads to better outcomes. Our journeys define us. For an autistic person, the path to a diagnosis varies greatly and largely depends on various factors, such as access to diagnosis, cultural, socioeconomic status, and gender. Due to a lack of research and the high financial cost of diagnosis, many women, and especially people of color, go undiagnosed their entire lives.
My story is different from Jake's. I always felt a little off, always marching to my own beat. I had a lot of different jobs and skills. You name it, I likely tried it. And if I didn't, I could learn lightning fast on the job. I'm highly aware of my environment. And soon after graduation from high school, I found I had many different medical challenges. As a child, I was often disciplined for talking too much and sharing too much knowledge or being a know-it-all. Making and keeping friends was an absolute mystery to me. I felt isolated and unable to relate to most. It was as if there was a thick pane of glass between me and the rest of the world. A transparent barrier where I could see friends, but couldn't reach them, and they couldn't reach me. After pushing myself so hard to be what people wanted me to be at work and in college, the toll eventually caused me to burn out, and my mental health was negatively impacted. I was unable to go to work. My experiences led me to a psychologist that recognized I'm autistic. Many women like myself are not diagnosed as children. The criteria used for diagnosis reflects how boys represent autism, not girls. Sadly, many young girls and women do not receive the support and tools they need to be the best versions of themselves. And for me, it took burnout to finally get what I needed.
Let me tell you about someone Nicole and I know. His name is Jerome. Jerome's parents worked full-time growing up to put food on the table. Disabilities, autism, speech, learning challenges, these weren't things that were spoken about in his family or his school community. He was called stupid, pushed to the back of the class. But Jerome made it through school, but always struggled socially, had trouble making friends, and keeping a job was very difficult. It wasn't until Jerome had his first child, who was diagnosed autistic at an early age, that Jerome realized he himself had similar traits. He realized that many of his struggles growing up and in the workplace resulted from these. Jerome pursued a diagnosis. Now he understands himself better. He has been able to find coping strategies to do his best work.
Every person's story is different. Just because someone is autistic doesn't mean they're having the same experience as someone else who is autistic. and autistic people themselves are at different places in their journey and understanding, accepting, and advocating for themselves. Where they are today may be very different from where they are 10 years from now. When you understand the diversity within the autism community, it helps facilitate better communication and understanding.
So we'll leave you with 3 daily intentions that we can all share when we begin the workday. Let's all work together to respect everyone's individual needs and encourage a person-centered approach at work. Let's dispel stereotypes and misconceptions about autism, which can lead to harmful assumptions and discrimination. Let's value every individual's diverse experiences and feelings.
By consistently showing up at work with these intentions, you actively contribute to creating a supportive environment for your autistic colleagues in the workplace. The words you choose when talking about and speaking to autistic colleagues are critically important to autistic people. Many of us in the autistic community have experienced countless years of discrimination, stigma, and labels. In recent years, stereotypes have been formed from how autism is portrayed in movies and TV shows. Societies worldwide are making changes, but it's a slow process. One of those changes is a shift in understanding autism from a deficit model to a strengths-based model.
These are demonstrated through 2 ways of viewing autism, which are called models of disability. You see, the medical model views autism as something to be cured. In other words, the medical model sees autism as something that's wrong and needs to be fixed. Then there's the social model. This model states that society has built or constructed social norms that exclude disabled people, including those who are autistic. The social model refers to how society has created barriers and discriminated against autistic people, which now is viewed as a natural variation of human biodiversity that should be embraced. These are 2 very different ways of viewing autism.
There are also 2 ways to refer to a disabled individual: person first or identity first. When person first is used, the person is placed before the disability, modeled with the phrase person with autism, and is most closely aligned with the medical model.
Identity first puts autism as part of the person and is modeled with autistic person. The autistic community specifically, with exceptions, prefers to be addressed identity first. This can be different for some who still prefer person first. So when you're not sure, it's great to ask.
We use identity first language to respect the overwhelming preference of autistic people regarding their choices on identity, with respect that some autistic people or their loved ones may not agree with this approach. It's essential to understand that many autistic people live with co-occurring medical diagnoses and disabilities that may impact their daily experience. What do I mean by co-occurring? Well, a co-occurring medical diagnosis means someone has more than one disability or diagnosis. And for anyone, multiple medical diagnoses can substantially limit life activities. For autistic people, it can elevate the presence of autistic traits. This is a really important consideration because additional diagnoses may not be obvious. They can be either visible or non-visible. Autism sometimes co-occurs with other diagnoses that fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence, such as ADHD, dyslexia, and dysgraphia. Quiet workspaces and assistive technology can make a big difference for individuals with diagnoses like ADHD or sensory processing challenges. Some other co-occurring diagnoses with autism are epilepsy, gastrointestinal issues, dysautonomia, Ehlers-Danlos, endometriosis, and learning disabilities. When any of these are present, they disrupt daily life. Now, for individuals with gastrointestinal issues, accommodations such as access to a private space to manage symptoms or the ability to take breaks as needed may be helpful. Another form of co-occurring diagnoses comes in the form of mental health. Many autistic people have experienced bullying and discrimination, which can result in severe anxiety and depression that's elevated by sensory overload and some social situations. These are just a few of the outcomes of living in a world not built for autistic people. Providing information about resources like support groups, therapy or counseling, and financial assistance for treatment can be very beneficial for individuals living with co-occurring diagnoses. Now, you might not feel comfortable suggesting these resources to an individual if they haven't opened up to you about their autism or co-occurring diagnoses. However, you could make it a standard for your HR team to regularly communicate and advertise the services that are available internally or in the community. This will be beneficial to not just autistic colleagues, but your entire organization. Always try to keep in mind that many individuals may experience additional disabilities, and they may choose not to disclose them to you. This is why it's important to create a compassionate and understanding workplace environment, and to respect the individual's right to privacy. For you as a manager, overall, supporting your autistic employee means one key practice: flexibility. Supporting your autistic colleague means making sure they have flexible schedules to allow for them to attend their medical appointments and care for themselves to stay in good health, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Always, always practice compassion. Compassion in the workplace is an important element to the successful inclusion and feelings of belonging for autistic people. And let's be real, it's an essential element to inclusion and feelings of belonging for all people. Let's chat about 3 specific autistic traits you may see in the workplace: special interests, hyperfocus, and preference for sameness. To start, autistic people often find a topic that captures their attention. Sometimes these are referred to as special interests. And when work correlates with these, it can lead to more satisfying and rewarding vocational matches. While engaged in a special interest, autistic people may also experience what is known as hyperfocus. Hyperfocus is a term that refers to the ability to focus so strongly on a task that passage of time and internal sensations may go unnoticed. Hyperfocus can contribute to higher productivity, but sometimes these special interests can consume attention and make transitioning to a new task challenging, which is important to be aware of. More often than not, hyperfocus benefits the autistic person, as it may allow them to complete hours of work in a short period of time, increasing their productivity and career growth opportunities.
Second, there may be a preference for sameness, manifesting in a few different ways. One we just discussed is changing from a preferred topic to something else. But the preference for sameness can also create challenges with unplanned events or routine changes. Taking a detour from an individual schedule may not be a simple task for some autistic people. At work, this can be as small as calling a last-minute meeting or as significant as changing the project they are on. Without warning, it is difficult for some. Finally, many autistic people are literal communicators and generally prefer to follow the rules. When this happens, it can impact their use of language and interpretation of something communicated. For example, my employee manual said no social media usage on company time. So when I needed my employee to post on LinkedIn for work, they waited till afterward to do it, interpreting the employee policy literally. I should have been more clear and direct.
Being aware of the presence of these 3 traits in the workplace helps everybody embrace our differences to work better together. In the previous video, we talked about a few common autistic traits. Let's talk about some more, starting with stimming. Stimming is short for self-stimulatory behavior and refers to repetitive body movements, vocal tones, or the use of a sensory fidget toy. Stimming is generally an unconscious action done solely to stimulate one's senses, or as an outcome of being under or overstimulated. When I'm happy, I get very excited. My voice changes, and I may bounce or flap my hands. When I'm in the lovely flow of hyperfocus, I may rock or sway as I work, like this. When in the zone, I often experience pleasure, and a stim can be the outward manifestation of my joy in concentration. As a late diagnosed autistic woman, I learned to hide many of my stims in public, especially vocal ones, as a way to fit in. But I have various vocal stims that come out when I'm in the comfort of understanding friends. In the workplace, the presence of stims, especially those that are vocal, may warrant a private or secluded work area to create an inclusive environment for all and alleviate any potential distractions. When asked how to address stims in the workplace, I try to walk people through a thought process. Is the person getting their work done? Is anyone getting hurt? Is it making it difficult for others to get their work done? Do you just find it odd? If it negatively impacts the workplace, you should address this privately and respectfully with the individual. As a colleague, the more you understand these traits and how they may impact work or present themselves, the better you can help your autistic employee implement strategies that provide them the opportunity to offer their best works and be their best self.
Another common trait that isn't always acknowledged by society is an autistic person's ability to perform strongly on visual tasks. There are many artists, writers, and other non-STEM career interests and exceptional skills that are missed because of limited technology-focused views of autistic abilities. We must remember that each autistic person is unique and avoid stereotyping autistic people.
I once worked in an office on a schedule that meant I arrived after my coworkers. When I walked into the room each morning, I thought to myself, do I say hi to them because I'm entering their workspace, or do they greet me as a newcomer to the space? Nearly every day I thought, should I say this? Or should I do that? And I often ended up keeping silent out of fear of doing something wrong. What ended up happening was I created an image that non-verbally informed others that I wasn't interested in them, when in fact I was very much interested, but overly anxious of making a social mistake. I unknowingly violated a social norm every morning, which led to coworkers developing an incorrect assumption about me. Our daily interactions with people are heavily influenced by social norms. You know, when to say something, how to say it, and who to say it to, when to offer input, when to pull back. These norms often feel natural to someone neurotypical, but can be a challenge to navigate for someone who is autistic. Yet society expects people to conform to these norms. When two people interact and they don't understand each other, it can cause a lot of misinterpretation. When interacting with your autistic colleague who doesn't look you in the eye, you might interpret that they don't like you or aren't interested. But many autistic people experience increased anxiety while making eye contact. When forced to follow the social norm of looking people in the eye, autistic people may lose the ability to fully engage in the interaction, process the information, and contribute to the discussion. Unfortunately, many people make assumptions when a coworker doesn't make eye contact when speaking to them. Likewise, some autistic coworkers may have facial expressions that don't match the social norms of a situation. Differences in facial expressivity can mean that those in the interaction may not receive the nonverbal body language messages they are accustomed to, and this can create confusion. This feels awkward to some, and they may shy away from communicating with another because of this. In the workplace, autistic people may not recognize your facial expressions or your body language either. If you look visibly annoyed or surprised, your autistic colleague may misunderstand or entirely miss these cues. We recommend in these instances that you react with compassion, communicate what you're feeling, and not react or make judgments about the autistic person's facial expression. We can change our inclinations when we interact with all people by focusing more on the information that is being communicated rather than the behavior. When it comes to interactions, it's important to understand the negative impact the social pressure can place on autistic people. To succeed in non-inclusive environments, autistic people have developed coping strategies to blend in better with their non-autistic coworkers. Many camouflage or mask their traits to act non-autistic with the idea that if they hide their natural traits, they'll avoid discrimination and feelings of isolation. Autistic people also mask traits to help their coworkers feel more comfortable around them. It's our survival mechanism. Masking is especially true of autistic women as society encourages us to be more social and friendly. But doing so for some autistic women is exhausting and detrimental to their well-being. Overall, with social interactions, you can support your coworkers by creating a more inclusive social environment, by letting go of your assumptions and whatever social expectations you place on people in your daily conversations. Instead, place value on the person you interact with for who they are and what skills they actively bring to make the team stronger.
Each of us has learning preferences. Like everyone, autistic people rely on their learning preferences to succeed in the workplace. And when organizations embrace their people's learning differences, all the way from orientation to onboarding to training and development, everyone at the organization will benefit. Let's discuss common learning preferences, starting with visual. Visual learners respond best by seeing new information. Seeing how information flows together usually makes more sense based on how they process information rather than trying to hold information in their minds and decoding it. Some examples are charts, mind maps, images, diagrams, and videos. On-demand videos, like this one, have helped many autistic people to learn new skills. They can rewatch, start and stop, and reference later. It removes the pressure to write notes during a live training or learn at someone else's pace. Then we have auditory learners who succeed when they hear information they are trying to learn. Some examples include listening to training, reading material out loud, teaching another person verbally, and receiving verbal feedback. Next, there are kinesthetic learners. They learn best with physical contact. They need to try things out with their hands or move their body to learn rather than being told or shown instructions. Learning through experience is a teaching methodology that can work well for kinesthetic learners. It allows an individual to dive in and learn on the job, or as I like to say, get your hands dirty. The more traditional way of learning is through reading and writing. This learning preference works great when individuals learn to absorb information when they can read and write it. This group most easily learns from books and benefits from taking notes during meetings. If you prefer reading, there is a transcript feature as part of this LinkedIn Learning video. You can find it below the video play bar. If you prefer, you can reference the transcript to reread this entire lesson. Do you know your learning preference? Knowing your preference may help you understand your colleagues' learning differences. With that in mind, let's do a quick exercise. Pause this video and write down 3 learning experiences from the past, anything where you learn new information. Then, next to each experience, write down how the learning was delivered. Then, write down what you liked and didn't like about it. Through this exercise, did you find anything surprising about how you learn best? Now that you're more aware of your learning style, let's talk about some practices that can help the entire team absorb the information they need to do their best work. Typically, meetings are delivered using auditory and visual information. We find it helpful to accommodate other learning preferences by finding someone who enjoys taking notes and assigning them as note taker during meetings. This will help them stay engaged and remember essential details. This strategy works for visual learners too. After giving any verbal instructions, try to follow up afterwards by sending an email to document the details in writing. Sharing meeting notes and checklists is also an excellent practice to help ease minds that may feel anxious about forgetting or missing a step. Overall, the biggest takeaway about learning preferences is to remember this. When striving to create inclusivity, use multiple tools to communicate tasks, visually, verbally, and written. By embracing multiple learning preferences, you help your autistic colleagues and you empower your entire organization by building an inclusive environment where people stay and want to contribute to your company's success for years to come. I asked the autism community on LinkedIn the one thing they wanted you, the viewer of this course, to know. The number one item shared was communication. Effective communication is essential for success in the workplace. But for autistic people, it can be a unique challenge. Let's explore how to create inclusive practices for communication that will promote psychological safety, enhance feelings of belonging, and increase productivity for our autistic colleagues. Now remember, communication isn't just about dialogue. It also includes instructions and evaluations and so many other areas within the workplace. Often, autistic people communicate differently. It's all the same language, but when the words are put together, they may have different meanings and interpretations depending on who sends and who receives the information. Based on this, the community wants you to know that there is nothing wrong with confirming essential details or information. Regular check-ins are a great way to accomplish this. Also, to help be a better communicator, try to avoid using vague language. One LinkedIn member wrote to me, "Vague rules and implied talk for those in the know is confusing and pointless. I need clear and concise explanations and details." Others simply added, "Just say what you mean and what you need. Don't assume the message hidden is being decoded how you intend it to be." That's why the check-ins and the practice of repeating back instructions help enable successful working relationships. This is also a part of the black and white thinking. Many autistic people take things very literally, so using slang, teasing, and such are interpreted at face value. Let's say you have a heated discussion at work. Some people can just brush these off. but an autistic person may walk away feeling that the person generally doesn't like them. This can change how they behave moving forward, and they may avoid this coworker altogether. Black and white thinking can also result in perfectionism. Let's say someone does an outstanding job on a project, but you give some feedback and suggest a revision. A black and white thinker may interpret the feedback to mean they failed because they were not perfect. Okay, here's how you can avoid miscommunication with your autistic colleagues. To start, ask clarifying questions, or ask them to repeat the task to be sure they interpreted your instructions as you intended. Most importantly, do not provide feedback using the sandwich method. This is when you give constructive feedback sandwiched between two positive statements of feedback. 2 is greater than 1. Therefore, the autistic person may leave thinking that overall they are doing great and may overlook or forget the constructive piece in the middle. Be clear with feedback and communicate each point individually and clearly. Another concept I want to introduce you to is front-loading. It's common for autistic people to need time to shift attention from one task to another or adjust to abrupt changes in routines. By front-loading, you cue or prepare the individual for an upcoming change. Sometimes these are changes to what they're doing, but it can also be last-minute requests, like asking someone to speak during a meeting. Last-minute changes, combined with a preference for sameness, can cause physical pain and stress. As colleagues, we must communicate effectively about things in advance to give time for some people to process the change and adjust so they can successfully move forward. Processing time is also needed in conversations. If you ask an autistic person a question, they may require a little extra time to process what was said and to create a response. Adding in pauses to allow for processing time is a helpful communication tip that will benefit your whole organization. We all communicate differently, and these are just a few ways to enhance communication with your autistic peers. This might be a lot to consider and incorporate into your workplace. So to start, what is one practice you can start incorporating into your week? If you need help, leverage the Q&A section under this video and pose a question around communication and check-ins with your fellow learners.
Have you ever heard of sensory processing? It describes someone who has a heightened sensitivity to their environment and the stimuli around them. And here's something you might not know. 90% of autistic individuals experience this sensitivity. But the good news is, creating a sensory-friendly workplace is something employers can easily do. So let's chat about what that might look like in the office. First, there's texture. People may react to the textures of uniforms, office chairs, and materials they need to handle for work. When this happens, the ability to focus on work becomes difficult, and productivity and engagement may decrease. Creating an environment where people feel safe asking for alternatives will increase their job satisfaction and motivation. Texture in food is also another significant sensory challenge. This may make it difficult to have business meals or other experiences where the individual has little control over their food selection. It is best practice to make these types of events optional and accept the norm that people can bring their own lunches. Next, there's noise. There can be loud machines in manufacturing, speaker systems in large buildings, the not too subtle hum of the printer, or the electric hum of a light. For some sensitive to sound, these sounds aren't as easy to brush off as they are for others. The brains of autistic people take in every sound and sensory input with less ability to tune them out. Sudden loud or repetitive noises are more startling than they might be to non-autistic people. And repetitive noises that others might not have noticed may be impossible to ignore. These can cause a complete sensory overload. If your workplace uses an open space office plan, alternative work options like hybrid and remote opportunities may be needed. If the job requires socializing in loud places or in crowds, it can become extremely uncomfortable, and accepting the presence of noise-canceling headphones and earplugs, in addition to making these events optional, will be helpful. Another sensitivity to consider is lighting. Fluorescent lighting, flashing signs, and bright colors on screens are just a few ways individuals can experience sensitivity to light. We can provide ways to assist in making the workplace more manageable by providing the ability to modify or invert colors on computer screens, reducing overhead lighting when possible, and allowing the usage of a tabletop or desk lamp with full spectrum light bulbs. Also, providing light sensitivity glasses to employees can help when they spend time in front of a computer. Lastly, when you combine multiple sensory experiences, it can lead to exhaustion. As one LinkedIn autistic person shared, the input with phones ringing, walking through the chatter, several coworkers half listening to music, all of these things compound during the workday, and by the end of it, I'm physically and mentally exhausted from having to redirect my brain constantly. The main takeaway is that sensory input can be more intense than non-autistic people may understand. The solutions I provided aren't difficult, and having open dialogue by asking the individual how they work best will allow people to thrive in the workplace.
What I keep telling everyone is what's good for the autistic employee is usually beneficial for all employees. And that is especially true with hybrid and remote work.
Before the COVID-19 pandemic, many autistic people asked for remote work. The preference to work remotely provides the ability to have some control over our environment, reduce any challenges associated with commuting, and eliminate the need to ask for environmental accommodations to do our best work.
I surveyed autistic people on LinkedIn about what they wanted employers to know, and the topic of remote, hybrid, and flexible work environments was at the top of the list. One person said, as an employee, remote work must be an option, or at the very least, a hybrid schedule. Another person explained why this was helpful by stating, I will have to do things differently than others. Working slightly different hours, working from home, and needing more time to prepare or process. But I will do my job exceedingly well. Another person shared that it gave them agency over their workdays, tasks, or goals, adding to their successful completion of tasks.
In their book, Remote Work, Chris Dyer and Kim Shepard discuss decision fatigue. How throughout the day we make micro decisions over and over again. But working remote allows us to remove so many decisions about preparing for work, like packing lunch, what to wear, how you'll get out of the side conversation you get pulled into. With remote work, you aren't starting the day already taxed with decision fatigue. Instead, you're ready to do your best work and be a full contributor to the organization.
We like to refer to this as keeping mental resources optimized for the work tasks. With remote work, less energy is used to manage sensory aspects of the environment, and working remotely often eliminates the small talk that can be associated with working on site with other coworkers.
But it's important to recognize that remote work requires frequent check-ins with an objective of clarifying tasks. Remote workers must not feel abandoned by their leaders. They must feel connected and part of the team. Remote workers also require company support to develop a comfortable working environment in the home. This may include the need for certain computer monitors, chairs for ergonomic comfort, and assistive technology to help reduce distractions in the home, such as other people in the environment like personal aides, job coaches, or others working from home remotely.
Lastly, keep in mind that video conferencing can be exhausting, especially when someone feels like they have to mask.
So send emails when you can, instead of asking us to join meetings, and give people the option to keep their cameras off. This will enhance in-person interactions that offer higher quality and are more productive.
Remote and hybrid work is here to stay. Make sure you're making it inclusive with a variety of ways to work. How can you, as a manager, help your autistic employees deliver their best work? There are many tactical ways, but it's important first to be intentional about how you can adjust your overall perspective as a manager before thinking about specific day-to-day interactions. To adjust your overall style, we recommend taking a person-centered management approach. Person-centered management focuses on the individual needs of each employee to ensure they feel supported. This type of management offers compassion, patience, and understanding of the individual differences of each employee to support in the workplace. One of the day-to-day practices you could do to take a more person-centered approach is to schedule regular check-ins with your autistic employees. Autistic people enjoy knowing they can comfortably check in with managers for feedback on their work, to ask clarifying questions, and learn how to best complete a project or task. These regular check-ins help you have regular conversations to get to know them, build a relationship, and strengthen your communication. When you have a better sense of your employees' needs, you will also strengthen productivity in your workplace. Next, it's important for managers and business leaders to understand that the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as the ADA, is the bare minimum a workplace can do to include disabled employees. It may be referred to differently in your area, but the essence is the same. Many workplaces are also now moving towards developing environments using universal design theory. Universal design refers to creating environments that accommodate numerous individual differences, which eliminates the need for employees to ask for basic accommodations. If you are a manager, explore more about the regulations and best practices of both ADA and universal design theory. Following ADA guidelines and recommendations is considered the bare minimum that employers can do to increase inclusion. Organizations must move beyond the ADA to incorporate elements of universal design theory. Also, the organization that oversees universal design for learning can be found at CAS.org, which provides a lot of information to inform you on this important topic. Accommodations provide employees with an equal chance to be successful in the workplace. Some accommodations include providing meeting agendas in advance and prior notice if an employee is required to stand up or speak in front of others. This advance notice can aid those who may be using augmented speaking devices, as the advance notice allows time to prepare information and responses. Advance notice can also help to reduce the stress associated with public speaking and allow for autistic employees time to process and prepare their answers or information. Clear expectations include providing instructions in multiple formats, offering checklists in visual and written form that includes step-by-step instructions to completing a job task or activity from start to finish. Think of meetings as a form of communication and offer accommodations such as the ability to stay off camera, attend remotely instead of in person, allow for movement, the use of fidget devices, and offer note-taking or assistive technology to aid in knowledge retention. Finally, trust. Trust is the bedrock for employees to feel comfortable disclosing, as many have faced discrimination from employers after disclosing an autistic diagnosis. If an employee discloses to you that they're autistic, it is vital to protect their privacy. which means that you're not permitted to inform other people of the diagnosis or repeat any information that person shared with you unless you have gained their expressed permission. Some people outwardly and openly identify as autistic, and many others prefer to keep their diagnosis or autistic identity to themselves. Therefore, providing employees with the confidence that you'll take privacy and confidentiality seriously is not only the law, but a form of support they need to sustain them long-term at your company. As their manager, this is your opportunity to provide psychological safety. If you work towards this as the goal, you'll have a memorable and positive impact in your autistic colleagues' work and their life.
My biggest tip when you're setting out to recruit more autistic talent is to rewrite your job descriptions. Often job descriptions don't accurately reflect the core skills and abilities required to succeed in a position. As an autistic woman, if I don't have all of the skills listed on the job post, I most likely will not apply. My general feeling is, the job post is what the company is looking for, and I don't have the skills that match. It doesn't occur to autistic people, especially women, that having 85% of the skills needed is great, because after being hired, they can receive training on the rest. Some may feel that they're wasting a hiring manager's time by applying. So autistic candidates may not apply for the job, and your organization misses out on great talent. So how should you go about refining these job descriptions to ensure this doesn't happen to you? To start, we recommend completing a job analysis with someone currently in the job you're hiring for. The process clarifies the core job tasks and responsibilities of the job. Focusing on the core elements changes the mindset from looking for the ideal candidate to looking for the right candidate. The key here is to be specific. What do I mean by that? For example, when a job description says you must be an effective communicator, how do they need to communicate? Oral or written, provide team updates, answer questions, or present to a large crowd. The general statement, effective communicator, is intimidating for someone who may have been challenged with communication. Analyzing core requirements includes being realistic about how many years of experience and degrees your candidate actually needs. It's common these days to see an entry-level job that requires 5 years of experience or a college degree. This doesn't sound very entry-level to me. Make sure the education requirements in your job description align with the experience required. You can do this by emphasizing the presence of skills over arbitrary titles and formal degrees. Then, to make the job description even clearer, remove industry jargon. Statements like self-starter, proven track record, or liaison can be vague. Remember, if a candidate isn't familiar with the language in your job description, they may think that they aren't qualified. The purpose of your job post is to also make an impression on the job seeker. You want them to get a feeling of what it will be like if they work for you. So, what story does the job post tell of employee experience? Are previous employees promoting you as a supportive employer? Do you include disability and neurodiversity as part of your diversity focus? You can't talk about diversity without including neurodivergent groups like autistic people. Your organization must make an active effort to add this group to your diversity, equity, and inclusion focus. It's a substantial group. Nearly 1 in every 7 people is neurodivergent and deserve to be part of the discussion. Finally, and this is important, in every job post, outline the interview process, location, and requirements. Autistic job seekers may want to be front-loaded with information. The more of the unknown you can remove, the more anxiety you reduce, which allows the candidate to perform at their best. Let them know if there are 4 steps in the process or a panel interview. Break it all down and include a brief summary. Once you've finalized your job post, don't forget to get it out to different candidate pools. Here are a few resources you can check out: Mentra, Hire Autism, Ability Jobs, and Getting Hired. Each provides employer and candidate education to facilitate a better job-person match and interview experience. Autistic people are very connected through social media and actively discuss good and bad employment experiences. Your effort at being more inclusive will be shared, so make sure you're thoughtful and considerate.
Now, let's move into the job interview. The job interview is often the number one challenge autistic people have when searching for a job because it's dependent on social norms and communication. We talked earlier about social norms and how they can impact others, and interviews are times when differences in communication can be heightened, such as lack of making eye contacts, perhaps hearing the question differently as a result of auditory processing. It may even be talking too much or not quite answering the question completely. It's an act that takes a lot of energy from the interviewee and usually interferes with the interview itself from finding a good person-job fit. This process also may not align with an autistic person's communication style. They may be seen as rude, disinterested, and unengaged. Also, walking into a new environment can distract you from being your best. Maybe lights are flickering in the interview room, there are loud noises, or what if someone's wearing a strong perfume? Who knows? Someone with sensory processing challenges can walk into their nightmare. Interviews also may ask behavior-based versus skills-based questions that require the individual to process the questions, formulate their response, and present the information in a very short amount of time in a high-pressure environment. If this is part of the job, that's one thing. But wouldn't it be better to find out if the person has the skills, abilities, and capabilities to do the work? Isn't that why they are there? So, if the way you're evaluating the interviewee doesn't match the on-the-job tasks, then you need to reevaluate your expectations of what you want to learn while you're spending time with the candidate. For example, if you're evaluating the candidate's ability to type 85 words per minute, even though the reality is that they're going to be working on the floor of a manufacturing facility, there is a misalignment with your expectations for your candidate and the reality of the job they'll fill. Now let's talk about a few things to make the interview process more autism-friendly. First, provide the interviewee with a detailed outline of the interview process. Who will be there? What will be the format? How long will it take? And what will be asked? This information allows the applicant time to prepare and show up to present their best selves. Always provide the interview questions beforehand, at least 24 hours. You want well-thought-out answers that demonstrate their skills, knowledge, and abilities. Remember, that's why you interview. Not everyone is comfortable engaging in self-promotion, so don't rely on the individual to sell themselves to you. Let them show you. Check your need to be flattered or impressed by what someone says or sells. It doesn't matter if they make you feel good if they don't have the skills to do the job. Finally, invite your autistic applicant to tour the working environment. This is a great way to give the applicant the information needed to understand the whole job. This also helps the autistic person determine if the job is the right fit for them and if they could be successful in the position. Making interviews more inclusive isn't too difficult. You just need to think about it a bit differently.
When we talk about the employment experience, whether the experience is for an autistic or non-autistic employee, it's best to break it down into 3 parts: orientation, onboarding, and check-ins. Many people get orientation and onboarding confused. Often they are interchanged, but I'd like to set a clear definition of each before we move forward. Orientation is the first experience once the employee is hired. This is the part where you welcome them to the organization, help them finish their employment paperwork, and teach them how to function day to day in your organization. And most importantly, it's where human resources hands off the employee to the hiring manager, and the employee begins to learn more about their specific job. This is where onboarding comes in. Onboarding is a longer process of inviting new employees into the workplace and offering the support needed to make sure they have the tools they need to do their best work. During this onboarding stage, the individual learns who to report to, how to communicate with teammates, how to ask questions, and where to find resources, and can begin to feel belonging in their new work role. We highly recommend assigning a mentor to your new employee during onboarding. An onboarding mentor can provide detailed information about the work environment, answer questions on who to go to for specific information or task completion, and aid a new employee with learning and understanding their work environment without engaging their direct management. The use of a mentor can also aid autistic employees by offering them a single point of contact through the process, which may reduce initial feelings of overwhelm that are associated with starting in a new job. A mentor can also offer a safe space to bring questions of etiquette or challenges being experienced that one may feel vulnerable asking a direct manager or supervisor. Another practice you can adopt is providing small videos and checklists for onboarding. Many autistic workers may be more successful when given information in small videos that they can re-watch or checklists to go through daily. Lastly, incorporate consistent communication by setting up regular check-ins. Ask your autistic coworkers or employees how they learn best. Identify their preferences for communication and share compassion and patience as they discover how to navigate their new surroundings successfully. These check-ins also aim to catch any of your employees' misunderstandings or ruminations that may be occurring and address them. It's valuable time that will give you an opportunity to understand your autistic employees' feelings, whether accommodations are successful or another should be tried, and what, if any, challenges are being experienced that you could alleviate or eliminate. Ultimately, being attentive and thoughtful about the employee experience through orientation, onboarding, and check-ins will make a big difference in lowering turnover rates and help to sustain your new employee as a valuable team member for years to come.
Evaluations can be a nerve-wracking experience for many, but for autistic people, they can be especially challenging. That's why it's important to approach evaluations as a discussion tool and an opportunity to develop measurable goals with milestones that will help your employee continue to grow. When it comes to autistic employees, clear and consistent feedback is key. Aligning your feedback directly with the job description is a great first step. Remember, autistic people can be literal thinkers, and it's important to eliminate any ambiguous criteria when evaluating their performance. A well-written job description provides criteria for measuring the implementation of the job and the skills the individual should be evaluated on. Without the shared understanding, evaluations become less effective and hard to measure. Evaluation should happen more often and consistently, not just once a year. This way, workers can change their behavior, ask for assistance, or request training as soon as possible. Remember, you've already invested in your employees through their orientation and onboarding process. They are an asset to your organization, and providing clear, concise, and consistent feedback will lead to mutually beneficial relationship for the individual and the company. Managers also play a crucial role in evaluations. They should be trained in writing clear and measurable goals. This will create a more inclusive workplace for all employees, but it's especially important for those with literal thinking patterns. It also helps to reduce subjective forms of evaluation. For example, if the job description reads, develop and maintain records associated with each client interaction, the goal can be to demonstrate the ability to access information of client interactions within 1 hour, 50% of the time. This gives the employee clear guidelines on what they need to do, the time frame to complete it, and the level of consistency required to achieve the goal. It's also important to remember the fact that evaluations often play a role in decisions such as promotions, discharges, and layoffs. Without clearly documented performance goals and evaluations, there is a risk of an employee claiming discrimination. Overall, evaluations are not just about pointing out mistakes, but also about identifying areas for growth and improvement. With a little understanding and sensitivity, we can make evaluations a positive and productive experience for all, including our autistic employees. I had the honor of speaking with Martin Griffin for our course. Martin is a geotechnical engineer. He identifies as autistic, dysgraphic, dyslexic, and a person with low vision. Martin shares his story of workplace disclosure and the emotional labor of self-advocacy. Emotional labor refers to regulating or managing emotional expressions with others as part of one's professional work role. It can be very taxing for someone to hold the emotional labor of self-advocacy on top of their regular work demands. Here's our conversation. Hey, Martin, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's great to have you on this call. How are you doing today?
I'm all right, thanks. You all right?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm really excited to talk to you. So my big question right now I want to start with is, when did you figure out you were autistic?
Mum was a special needs tutor. So she self-diagnosed me as dyslexic when I was, 6 years old. Then dyspraxia came in, and then autism came in, but not officially diagnosed. When I got made redundant from one job, and I thought, it's probably best to get an official diagnosis. But then I hid it up from a lot of people because I think all the stigma. Coming to terms with it, just finding out more about yourself and just self-diagnosing, and then ticking all the boxes, not ticking all the boxes, but ticking lots of the criteria. You think, that's me, that isn't me. And then I think that makes sense now.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot where, even though people self-identify, to get that formal diagnosis is kind of reassuring.
You find you're not alone, but then you do feel, paradoxically, you're more alone. Because then there's the neurodiversity community, but then you're more alone at work because people don't understand who you are more, because you've got to.
How has it affected you when you're at work or just getting jobs?
I think it's hard getting jobs because I think you can hide it to some extent, but then you get stressed, you get autistic burnout, and you can get meltdowns. I mean, meltdowns are very hard to mask. like my current boss, he did due diligence, I think, beforehand. Well, I know he did. He talked to one of my old bosses beforehand. So he knew about my autism, my dyslexia beforehand, and my dyspraxia beforehand. So before I had the interview, it was almost like he knew about me, and we just had like a coffee chat about the job and what it was entailing. It was like a job. It wasn't sit around a table and formal 2 or 3 people around intimidating you almost at the interview panel. And I think that can be very off-putting. Sometimes a lot of companies, they give you questions beforehand. That helps, but then I think that can almost make you worse in one way, because you can ruminate before the night before because you've got autism.
So, Martin, do you find it was easier that your old boss disclosed to your new boss for you instead of you disclosing yourself?
Yes, I think it did. Then I didn't have to do a lot of explaining or kind of apologetics to say that I'm autistic, and then he sort of had an idea of what it was entailed. I'm trying to educate him and try to teach him a bit about myself and what makes me tick. So then hopefully I can dovetail him, work better with a neurotypical person, which is good, because I think we get the best results with a neurotypical and a neurodiverse person.
So what's that mean to you as you come into this workplace, knowing that you don't have to hide that part of yourself?
It's made it easier, but I think it's just, there's times sometimes I wish, sometimes I hate being autistic, but I wouldn't change it, if that makes sense. Because there's sometimes when you have a bad day, like a meltdown or a shutdown or so much over information, no one can understand. No, you're the only one in the office who can understand, knows what's going on, or you can explain it to them, but you're experiencing it. You can't tell people how, and you have to work it out yourself. Do
you feel like your new boss would be more understanding to be able to kind of give you a break versus?
Yeah, he's really understanding at the moment, and I've said to him, as long as he wants me there, I will stay there, because it's so hard to get a good employer. Looking for another job or something would be harder. New people, new surroundings, I think that would be harder.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your lived experience with us. I learned a lot from you, and I look forward to the LinkedIn community learning a lot from you too.
Thank you.
I interviewed my friend Lee Chambers to get their thoughts on intersectionality. Dr. Chambers is an award-winning British psychologist, coach, and entrepreneur. You might be wondering what intersectionality is. Intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, and this includes neurodivergence, like autistic people. When someone is Black and is autistic, for example, they are experiencing intersectionality. Other factors might be gender, sex, race, sexuality, disability, and physical appearance. Here's our conversation. Hi, Lee. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to join you, Nicole.
How are you?
I'm really well, thank you.
So the first question I want to ask is, did intersectionality play a role in your decision to become an entrepreneur?
So I think for me, growing up as Black and autistic, in education, I kind of felt restricted, and I felt like I was, suffering 2 layers of stereotypes at the same time. I think that the systems and institutions and structures that I was part of, while I tried to excel in them, I actually found myself quite limited, and also, continued to worry and have a lot of kind of self-validation issues around fitting into certain stereotypes of being hyper-professional at school and, really performing. And I think that kind of took a toll on my mental health. By the time I got to university, all the masking, all the efforts to continue to try and fit a very narrow band of stereotype really, created a wider impact on me. And I tried to go out into the corporate world and make a success of that. But accommodations were simply physical. There was very, very little understanding of anything that could be done differently. And I tried to, use my kind of divergent thinking to really create efficiencies. And I was a junior employee. I wasn't listened to. I wasn't heard. And I just felt that for me, I wanted to go on and not only build something that made a difference in the world, but also build something where my accommodations could be considered. And I actually had a level of control over creating them. And I was lucky enough to be able to set up my first business 15 years ago. And being able to set up a business in itself is a privilege, because for some people in some countries, you're simply not in a place where you're allowed to do so.
How has inequality impacted your well-being?
Initially I started my career in the corporate world, and again, I really wanted to kind of justify myself being there. Had some of my own kind of self-esteem issues from some of the challenges that I'd faced, being young, and some of the discrimination that I'd faced as well. I wasn't able to bring my skills and strengths. And actually, as that became a bit more challenging, I became micromanaged more and more. And that just made me try and mask even more and more to fit in. It started to feel, really unsustainable. And over time, that sheer amount of resistance, it just caused me to not only start to lose my identity and lose my edge, it started to make me feel like I was worthless. I was actually made redundant, which finally gave me the freedom and in some ways the permission to go and start building a business. And all those little things that overlay, with being black, some of the microaggressions, the judgment, still suffered that in the business arena. But I was able to use my, neurodivergent abilities, and people saw them much more as strengths and much more as, differences that were a positive way, an addition rather than a deficit. And, suddenly being able to do that in a more fluid environment where I was able to explore and create, it made a massive difference to my mental well-being. And the reality is, when you be yourself, you're much more likely to be stereotyped with the racial stereotypes that are, you are difficult to work with, you are challenging to manage, you are too direct, you are too aggressive. And actually, the biggest one that impacts so many Black neurodivergent people, it's such a challenge because for Black women who are neurodivergent, they've got the additional gender microaggressions that layer on top of that as well. And that increased intersectional aspect just amplifies the challenges that they have. Organisations need to look at the intersections to understand where it can then impact not only the accommodations that are brought in, but the stereotypes that people are trying to avoid and some of the assumptions and biases that they also face. If we're going to be truly inclusive, we need to be allies and really kind of broach some of the systemic challenges that other people are facing. And if we can get people starting to look intersectionally at challenges, we can create a more equitable society where people can thrive.
I agree. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to engaging with you in the future.
Yeah, a pleasure to meet you, Nicole, and the rest of the team too.